The courthouse steps in Middleton were drenched in early morning light, the kind that gave the city an illusion of peace, while behind its historic facade, a very different story was brewing. One that would not unfold in whispers or newspaper columns, but with a roar that would shake the foundations of power. Outside the grand building, lawyers, interns, clerks, and reporters went about their routines, exchanging coffee-fueled nods and casual talk about another case on the docket. None of them knew they were about to witness something that would be carved into the city's memory, breaking open decades of hidden corruption. Inside courtroom 13, tension clung to the air like a storm cloud that refused to break. Officer Brent Colton stood by the prosecution table, arms crossed, eyes sharp with irritation and an arrogance built from years of unchecked power. Behind him stood his partner, a younger, anxious officer named Mason Terrence, half a step behind, as always bound not by respect, but by fear. Sorry to interrupt the story. Before we continue, we'd really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us get closer to 1,000 subscribers. It means the world to us. Thank you so much. How much longer are we supposed to wait? Brent snapped at the court clerk, his voice cutting through the quiet room. He wasn't used to waiting, especially not in Middleton, where his badge had always been both shield and sword. The clerk flinched but replied evenly, "Please be patient, sir. Her Honor will be arriving shortly." Just then, the double doors creaked open. A woman walked in, not in a judge's robe, but in a sharp navy blue suit. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back, her eyes calm but observant, eyes that missed nothing. Brent glanced at her and immediately dismissed her. To him, she was just another clerk or junior lawyer, too timid to matter. With a wave of his hand, he barked, "Hey you, bring me the Willis file, now." The woman said nothing. She walked to the documents table, picked up a file, and calmly scanned it. Her silence annoyed Brent more than words ever could. He strode to Quinn her, sneering. "I said I'm talking to you," he hissed loudly. Then, without hesitation and with no sense of consequence, he slapped her. The sound of it cracked across the courtroom like a gunshot. The room froze. The clerk gasped. Reporters dropped their pens. Officer Terrence went pale. The woman stood still. Her cheek was red, but her composure remained. It was as if the slap had hit not her skin, but justice itself. "You should know your place if you want to keep your job," Brent muttered. But something felt wrong. The silence pressed in. Without looking away, the woman stepped to Quinn, the judge's bench. Then she did something no one expected. She opened the door behind the bench, stepped up onto the platform, and reached for the black robe. She slid her arms into the sleeves, turned to the courtroom, and the air shifted. Judge Mariah Quinn," the clerk whispered, voice trembling. Brent's heart dropped. Terrence stepped back in shock. She sat, calm and unreadable. Then she spoke. "Yes, I am Judge Mariah Quinn," she said, her voice smooth and steady. "And I am the presiding judge of today's proceedings." Brent felt his knees weaken. Cold sweat ran down his spine. He had just assaulted not a clerk, not a paralegal, but a judge. One of the most respected, most powerful figures in Middleton's legal system. The first black woman to serve on the superior bench. Her gavel struck once. "Officer Brent Colton," she said, "you are hereby the subject of formal criminal investigation for assaulting a sitting judge." The words sent shock waves through the room. Brent opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His arrogance, once his armor, had crumbled under her gaze. She didn't shout. She didn't flinch. Her power was in her stillness, in the certainty of her presence, in the knowledge that the tide had turned and would not be reversed. Outside, Middleton went on as usual. Traffic crawled along Riverbend Avenue. The historic brick homes along Federal Street basked in autumn sunlight. Vendors laughed over coffee. The city, known for its charm and cobblestone streets, wore its mask well. Middleton was known for its old-world elegance, its jazz cafes and museums housed in former mansions. But those who had lived there long enough knew that behind every manicured lawn and high society gala was a long history of racial inequity and institutional rot. Mariah Quinn had grown up in that very shadow, navigating both its beauty and its venom. Born on the south side of the city and raised by her grandmother after her mother died too young, Mariah had spent her childhood dodging sideways glances, underestimation, and polite condescension masked as civility. She excelled in school, earned her law degree on scholarship, and went on to defend those who had no one else. Her early years as a public defender taught her that justice often bowed to the loudest wallet or the sharpest suit, but she never bent with it. She rose case by case until the governor himself appointed her to the bench. And yet, even with the robe and the title, she knew the prejudice hadn't died, it had only learned to whisper softer. Brent Colton was a product of the old Middleton. He came from a family with 3 generations of law enforcement. His father was a decorated officer. His grandfather, a captain, had once walked the same courthouse halls. From the moment he joined the force, Brent was taught that power came from presence and presence from intimidation. He learned that the badge could be used not just to protect, but to control. Over the years, whispers about his behavior surfaced, beatings brushed aside, reports lost, victims silenced. Each time, the system bent to protect him, afraid of scandal, unwilling to disrupt the order. But that morning, Brent's slap had done more than strike skin, it had pierced the myth of untouchability. He looked at Judge Quinn, now seated high above him, calm and fierce. Her robe or her gavel, her voice, they no longer represented the institution that once protected him. They were now weapons in the hands of someone determined to dismantle the very system that enabled his rise. Mason Terrence stood frozen beside him, too afraid to speak, too aware of the collapse happening in real time. He wasn't a leader, he was a follower, always had been. He joined the force to escape a life of invisibility, to feel part of something larger. But now that something was crumbling, and he could do nothing to stop it. Mariah turned her eyes to Quinn, the young officer, reading his panic like an open book. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply recorded everything, every flinch, every twitch, every sign of guilt. Her courtroom was no longer a place of routine. It had become a battlefield, and she stood at the center, not with armor, but with truth. "Officer Terrence," she said evenly, "you will remain in this room. You are now a material witness to a criminal offense." The words dropped like stones into a still lake as the clerk scrambled to record every word. Mariah leaned back slightly, hands folded on the desk. She was not just judging today's case, she was delivering a reckoning. For years, the people of Middleton had whispered about the abuses, the disappearances, the arrests made on flimsy charges. Her courtroom had often been the last refuge for those abandoned by a system too comfortable in its own silence. The silence had been broken. What began as a minor vandalism case involving a young black teenager had now become a turning point for the city's conscience. Mariah had reviewed his file carefully before entering, no robe, no judgment, just a desire to understand the human behind the case. But Brent hadn't seen someone worthy of that space. He saw only a quiet black woman and assumed she was invisible. That was his mistake. And it was just the beginning. The weight of what happened lingered in courtroom 13. The quiet wasn't shock, it was awareness. Mariah sat still, her robe no longer a symbol of tradition but of reckoning. Brent hadn't just hit a woman, he'd struck the core of a system that had long protected men like him. And now, that system was finally striking back. Brent stood frozen, his confidence drained. The tactics he once trusted, relationships, bravado, silence, no longer worked. Across from him, Mason Terrence blinked like someone waking from a lie. He had followed Brent for the comfort of rules that bent only for the powerful. But now, faced with Mariah's quiet power, he saw that foundation crumble. Mariah calmly adjourned court. The room stirred, some rushing to report what they'd seen, others too stunned to move. Brent remained still. Mason watched the exits, torn between fear and shame. Back in her chambers, Mariah moved with steady resolve. Terrence Delancey stood waiting, concern in his eyes. "I heard," he said softly. "They said he hit you." "He didn't see me," she replied. "He saw someone to command." A fiction he believed was beneath him. Terrence sighed. "They'll try to spin it." "Let them," she said, placing her glass down. "We'll give them something they can't twist." Terrence leaned in, voice low with concern. "If you go after him, you'll expose more than just him, people you used to trust, maybe even higher." "I know," Mariah replied, her eyes drifting to Quinn, the city. "But I'm tired of watching Middleton devour its own people in the name of justice. If the curtain's lifting, let it rise." Outside, the city buzzed. News of what happened in courtroom 13 spread fast. Videos surfaced. Reports confirmed a veteran officer had struck a judge, once unthinkable, now undeniable. But few knew how deep the damage ran. Terrence returned, placing a thick manila folder on her desk. She didn't need to open it to know. Years of quiet collecting complaints, memos, sealed statements. Brent wasn't just corrupt, he was part of a system that punished truth and protected power. One file stopped her, a statement from Elijah Rantry, arrested at 16. Beaten, called names, discarded. She had ruled on his case once, too little evidence, no support, but never forgot his eyes. This is the time, she told Terrence, not just for Brent, for all of it. She returned to court. The room went still. Brent looked up, sensing too late the gravity of his mistake. Officer Colton, Mariah said, this court will file for a federal investigation into your conduct and into anyone who helped cover it. Brent tried to object. I didn't know. Ignorance, she interrupted, is not a defense. It's the disease. Outside, protesters gathered. They treated my cousin like an animal, one woman told reporters. Now the truth's out. By nightfall, Middleton was restless. Leaders scrambled with vague responses. But the people had seen Mariah's eyes, heard her voice. This wasn't a trial. It was a reckoning. That night she sat by the fire, tea untouched. She remembered when she believed truth alone could win. Now she knew it had to be protected, like flame and wind. In the morning she would meet federal agents. The folder was only the first. More names would follow. More truths long buried. She didn't welcome the battle, but she didn't fear it. Because justice isn't a destination. It's a direction. And now it was finally facing true north. The folder Mariah had brought revealed not just one bad officer, but a system built to protect him. Disappearing investigations. Lost footage. Silenced witnesses. This isn't just a case, Vega said. It's a web. If we pull one thread, the whole system may fall. Are you ready for that? For that? I've been ready, Mariah said. I just didn't know it until he raised his hand. Together they went through names, corrupt prosecutors, complicit judges, police chiefs who had protected Brent. A plan formed, sealed indictments, simultaneous warrants. No warnings. It wasn't just about Brent anymore. He was the first domino. Now it was about the entire machine. Meanwhile, Brent sat in a holding cell, staring at the wall, haunted by the moment she reached for her robe. He replayed it again and again, hoping it was a nightmare. But the silence from his former allies told him the truth. The protection was gone, and justice was coming. Brent's inner circle had vanished. He was thrown to the wolves before he even realized what was happening. Only one person came to visit Alton Vex. He walked into the precinct trying to look casual, but his tense face gave him away. Brent sneered as he saw him. So you do remember me? Vex didn't respond to the jab. I came to warn you. She's working with the feds. And she's not stopping. Brent laughed bitterly. You think I need warning now? I'm already in hell. Not yet, Vex said. But you will be. Unless you give them something bigger than you. Brent leaned back, eyes full of bitterness. You want me to flip on Halperin? Vance? Vex didn't answer. That was enough. So I take the fall and you don't? So we don't all go down together. Meanwhile, inside Mariah's chambers, the wall of silence was finally cracking. Officers confessed to altering reports. Clerks admitted to losing files on purpose. A former lieutenant handed over a decade of hidden memos. The system that once felt untouchable was beginning to crumble. That night, Mariah stood by the window, remembering her grandmother's words. They can only use silence against us. So speak even if your voice shakes. Her voice no longer shook. It moved through paperwork, courtrooms, and strategy. Outside, the protests grew organized, determined. Young people marched with signs that read, "We see you," and "Quinn speaks, we move." For the first time, Middleton was listening. But the backlash came quickly. Her sister Donica called in a panic, her tires slashed, a threat left on her windshield. Mariah had prepared for this, but knowing and living it were different. Is Micah safe? She asked, her voice tense. He's fine, Terrence replied. Escorted home. 2 agents watching. Mariah exhaled slowly. She knew truth came with a price, but now her family was paying it too. By midnight, the sealed indictments were finalized. Arrests would happen quietly at dawn. In the early morning, she stood by her desk, folders stacked like bricks. She wasn't afraid. Fear had long burned away, replaced by clarity. She picked up a small gavel her grandmother once gave her. Etched on the bottom were the words, "When they fear your silence, speak." And she would. Just before sunrise, Middleton began to change. Unmarked vehicles rolled through silent streets. Agents in plain clothes knocked on doors once thought untouchable. ADA Alton Vex was arrested at home in Fairhurst. Neighbors watched from windows stunned. Chief Elwood Vance was taken mid-swing on a golf course. Judge Warren Halperin sat frozen as his warrant was read aloud. And then, calmly, quietly, Judge Mariah Quinn stepped for Quinn. When he entered the room, he couldn't meet her eyes. She said nothing she didn't need to. The silence between them was the verdict. Throughout the day, Middleton's media erupted with the names of those arrested. The city's skyline, once a symbol of wealth and tradition, now became the backdrop of a reckoning. News anchors spoke with certainty. The evidence was undeniable: documents, recordings, and long-buried footage now played across every screen. What had once been dismissed as rumor, whispered in barbershops and churches, was no longer theory. It was truth. Fun. At the center of it all was Mariah, not as a hero, but as the spark. She didn't hold press conferences or chase headlines. Yet every time her name was spoken, it carried weight. Protesters who once stood quietly outside her courtroom now marched loudly with purpose. They chanted her name not to glorify her, but to represent a shift. Their signs no longer begged for justice, they claimed it. They declared justice was here. Inside her chambers, Mariah worked steadily. She reviewed files, signed court orders, and met with victims. Young men who had been wrongfully jailed were being released. Families who had waited in silence now saw their loved ones return, not just with relief, but with dignity. For Mariah, this was the real gavel, not wood on a desk, but lives restored when truth was honored. Still, not everyone welcomed the change. Whispers stirred in Middleton's elite circles. Some saw reform not as justice, but as threat. The mayor, once silent, now stumbled through public statements. A few city council members demanded an inquiry not into the corruption, but into whether the investigation had gone too far. Mariah wasn't surprised. She knew when power is exposed, it hides deeper in the shadows. That evening, her nephew Micah sat beside her on the floor, flipping through pages of his school project on civil rights leaders. He stopped at a photo of a woman in black robes, her hand raised in defiance. "Was it like this for you?" he asked. Mariah looked at the image, not of herself, but of a judge from decades earlier who had once stood alone. She nodded gently. "It's always like this," she said. "Every time someone dares to stand up, the resistance looks different, but it always comes. When you try to change the world," Mariah told Micah, "it pushes back harder." "But you didn't stop," he said. "I couldn't. When you carry the truth, you don't get to set it down just because it's heavy." Later, Terrence looked up from a pile of reopened cases. "They'll want you to run for something, mayor, senator." Mariah smiled. "I'm not chasing titles. I'm building something that lasts." Days later, on the courthouse steps, a ceremony was held not for her, but for the victims. Families came for Quinn, stories were told, names were honored. Mariah didn't speak. She just listened. Then, one morning, she called a press conference. "I thank this city not for believing in me, but in truth," she said. "Justice must belong to all of us." Then came the surprise. "I'm resigning from the bench." Gasps followed, but she stood firm. "It's time for new voices to rise. I'm not leaving the fight. I'm passing the torch." At home, Micah asked, "Why step down now?" "Because real power," she said, "is what you leave behind." Weeks later, the city kept changing. More cases reopened. New leaders stepped up. Mariah began teaching law, helping others rise. Her home was calm again. The garden grew. The silence was no longer heavy. One evening, Micah asked, "Will the city stay better?" "That depends on you," she said. "Justice isn't a place, it's a path. Just keep walking." And with that, her legacy lived on, not in power, but in the people who carried her fire for Quinn. This story is more than a wake-up call, it's a powerful reminder. Justice doesn't always appear when we need it, but when truth is spoken, it has the power to shake an entire system. Through every word, every decision, and every act of courage, we learn that silence is the only thing that can be weaponized, while a voice, no matter how small, can shift an entire city. We learn that justice doesn't live in robes or gavels or official titles. It lives in persistence, bravery, and a refusal to give up in the face of injustice. The most important message here is this: anyone, regardless of rank, can carry the torch of truth. Starting today, we can begin by listening, truly listening to the stories of others. We can stand up when we see wrong being done, even in the smallest ways. In the next 5 years, we must build spaces where marginalized voices are heard, protected, and uplifted. Will racism end by 2045? Maybe not completely. But if each generation walks a little farther to win justice, the future will no longer be a place where injustice hides, but a place where truth is honored. And perhaps the small steps we take today will be the foundation of a more just world tomorrow. Note: this story is entirely fictional and created for the purpose of raising awareness. It highlights issues of responsibility, justice, and the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity. We firmly oppose violence, prejudice, and injustice in all forms. Viewer discretion is advised.